welcome. Thanks, Dave, for your time today. So thanks to everyone joining as well. Dave recently summited the highest mountain in South America, which is also the highest mountain outside of the Himalaya. So in case you don't know, that is 22,837 foot or 6,959 meter Aconcagua in Argentina. So congrats, Dave. Thanks for sharing your story with us today. And this was not your first attempt to summit Aconcagua. And that's a lot of what I think we'll focus on today, because I don't like the word failure. I don't think there are many failures in our lives. And I think it's all about if something doesn't go the way we thought it would or hoped it would, it's about learning from that experience and making changes and doing something differently the next time. And I think that's exactly what you did here. So I want to focus on what you learned from your first attempt and how you changed your preparation and your mindset for the second attempt at Aconcagua. And then, of course, we'll wrap things up today with any tips or things you learned that you want to share with anyone else who might be planning a trip to Aconcagua. So maybe just start by walking us through 2023. How did it go? Set the stage for us.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Of course, I listened to all your podcasts when I was,
Thanks.
when you had me go on my long run. So I'm like, well, let me throw this on. So let me put a podcast on and listen to this. And of course, driving across country, so they're great. So I'm really, I'm honored to be here to share the story with you and your listeners, and hopefully you find it beneficial.
For sure.
Yeah, 2023 was, so the idea started in 2022 to climb Aconcagua, a big mountain, and a group of us kind of got together. And one person knew, it was a group of four, one person knew the other three, but the other three, I was one of the other three, didn't know each other. So that's always interesting because you don't know everybody's dynamics. You don't know the skills. Yep. The whole aspect of setting a team is different when you don't know somebody, you don't know their capabilities. So we all got there in, I guess it was February. So February or January of 23, we went down. Yep. Attempt to summit, and we didn't do a guided one. Now we got support. So we got support from Grijalva's Expeditions through the first camp and base camp. They provided support and some porter help, minimal after base camp. But we ran into some issues. We ran into some issues in terms of, I think we moved too fast.
Okay.
We underestimated the acclimation process. We didn't really have a designated group leader. You go on a guided trip, you have a guide, and who's the leader, who's going to make decisions and tell folks. On this recent trip, we had guides. The guides told some folks, "Hey, we made a decision. You're going back." And when you don't have a centralized leader for a team or a group, conflict can arise or it cannot arise, or decisions can be made or not made. And, we all had the best intentions, but I think we ran into some issues that, ultimately affected some of the climbing dynamic. But as I looked at that, it was like, okay, what was my impact? So I turned around at 19,500 feet. So Camp Colorado, I was starting to feel sick. Once I got there, I was like, all right, this is not good. I was dry heaving. I turned around. One other person turned around at Nido de Condoras. Two others that were on the expedition. One did summit, but needed assistance getting off the mountain, and another one needed assistance getting off the mountain as well. So I think we all went with the great intentions, but I think if we could all go back and do it over, we probably do things a little bit differently. So that's really kind of what led to my change in mindset going into this year.
And I would imagine what I know about you came off the mountain in 23 and you probably really thought about what could have been done better or where things started to fall apart. Is that fair to say? You actually assessed how you wanted to approach things differently the next time?
I was thinking about that as I was walking from Plaza de Mulas back to the trailhead. I was thinking about it. I tell people, when you're in it, it's hard to see certain things. And then walking off the mountain and reflecting, I was frustrated with myself because there's lots of things I should have seen, but that I didn't. And I was just like, I was shaking my head. I'm like, God, we violated so many principles of whether it's climbing or team dynamics. There was just things that we all probably know because all of us are a group of leaders and we probably all should have known. But again, it just goes to show when you put people in a setting, if the conditions aren't set, you can just find yourself going into things. So walking off the mountain, I was already thinking about, oh, wow, we violated a lot of things that we talk about,
in your work,
in my day-to-day life and my work life. And that was a struggle for me a little bit because it was like, damn, I should have known that. And then why didn't I say something, right? I kind of looked at what was my role in everything. how did I contribute to, where we're at, and what can I do the next time? Because at the end of the day, it's still, I had to go back and look at how was I prepared or not prepared, and what could I
Yeah.
do differently.
What were the things at the top of your list as you made that assessment that you wanted to do differently the next time?
Oh, everything. I mean, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that in a negative sense in terms of I just really went back and I was looking, because I really thought at first when I came off the mountain, I was like, I did everything I could and I got sick, right? So, dynamics aside, there were still, what about me? Like, what about my role? I felt like, hey, well, I did everything I could. I was prepared. I physically prepared. I was ready. I had the gear. That's how I felt when I initially got off the mountain.
Based on what you knew at that moment in time about preparation, you thought I did everything I could do.
Yeah, I did. So I thought I was good. I was like, I was upset that I didn't reach the summit, but I was also looking at it from, well, I prepared, so I controlled the process. So yeah, I mean, I'm upset, but at the end of the day, I did everything I could. That started to change over because I'm pretty sure I thought about this every day for 2 or 3 months easily. Like
It was
I
haunting you.
was I was just replaying it. And then I started to think, well, there were lots of things that I did not, my process was not as good as I thought.
What are some of those things that you later realized you could have done better?
I kind of look working backwards is, when I decided to go back, I was like, I'm going to go back with the guiding company. And I'm going to go back with the guiding company because there was a couple things that it allowed me to do. One was the acclimation cycle was a little bit, it was set. There's a
Yep.
company there that has been doing this year in and year out. They kind of have the secret sauce to here's how you need to acclimatize. It was kind of that we felt like we could, but it doesn't mean we should.
Such a good, quick segue. I remember one time I was on Rainier, my favorite local mountain, and I was going to summit in a day, and I was climbing with someone else, and he had to turn around. And I was like, man, I think I probably could do this on my own, right? The route is in, the conditions are good. I've been up there before, but that doesn't mean you should do it. And
Yeah,
I
that's
did do
exactly
it.
right. I mean, basically, when I went back and I kind of looked at what the plan was with the guiding company versus what we did, I mean, we as a group basically skipped like 3 acclimation days that we were not going to skip as part of the guiding company. And that was important for, I think one of the four of us lived in Cal, lived at 8,000 feet or however many meters. And I say that jokingly because this last trip I was down there, like I'm the only one speaking in feet. Any American is speaking in feet, everybody else is speaking in meters.
I
And I'm
know.
like, I don't know what the translation is. I'm at roughly like 53 meters or 175 feet. So going from there to Argentina and moving so quick, I think, that just played a role in it. So the acclimation process, and then, I was like, okay, well, water. I consume a lot of water anyway. And I was on Diamox. So
Yeah.
it was, the 5 to 6 liters of water a day. I was not getting because once we got past base camp, we were melting our own water. We couldn't generate enough water. We couldn't melt it fast enough. So I was like, okay, I want a guiding company that's going to allow me acclimation, is going to allow me water. They have porters. So I very specifically was like, hey, I'm going to do porters this time because my goal is the summit. I've carried stuff up this mountain. I know the impact. I don't want to do that again, which is funny because I'm watching my new team discuss porters and I'm like, I'm getting porters. I'm
I
like,
think it is such you and I spoke about this before. Maybe, it was someone else who was on
no,
Aconcagua.
we did because I
Okay.
did text you at base camp. I was like, it's so funny to watch this discussion about porters. I'm like, I'm getting a porter.
Yeah, and there is no shame in that at all. My rule, another older mountaineer gave me this many years ago, was like, as long as you are honest about the way you climb and the way you climb isn't harming anyone else, it doesn't matter. Everyone else has their personal set of guidelines and values. And if you want to carry all your gear up Aconcagua, that's fantastic. And if you don't, also fantastic.
I had some good conversations around. When we came back from the summit, there was a couple that did not attain the summit said, oh, you had the key, get porters and save your energy. I'm like, but my goal was not to carry stuff because I also kind of look at it as if that was my goal, then I wouldn't be eating at base camp. I wouldn't be eating at Confluencia. I wouldn't have
Right.
all this other support. So
Where
how do you measure it?
Exactly. Like, am I not going to wear crampons because that's an aid too? Is Gore-Tex out? Like, where do you draw the line? And I think it really, Victor Saunders was the mountaineer who gave me this advice years ago. You have to just be comfortable with the way you're going to climb. and be open about that. And that's what really matters. There's no set way to climb any mountain.
No, there's not. And that was, that was all part of it. I knew they were professional. I looked at all the other things. My training is like, okay. And it was funny. There's a climber, Mia Farrows. I think you and I have talked about her. She's actually going back to Aconcagua in the next day or two. I think by the time you post this, she's going for the 365
Awesome.
goal. And I remember, I've never met her in person, but I've exchanged Instagram messages, been super helpful. And I remember she posted something about it was her Training Peaks fitness score after her last attempt. And it was like 104. And, I'm sure we'll talk about this. And I looked at mine at the time and it was like 30 something. I was like, holy crap, I'm not even close. Right. So I was like, okay, whatever I think, I'm going to reassess my training. And you and I had talked before the first time that
We
I talked.
did. Yep.
So I was like, I'm going to readjust my fitness or my training plan. Then how can I acclimatize earlier, whether it's a hypoxic tent and or moving out to Colorado to get all those training things in. So I really just went back and looked at all the things I could control. And I'm not sure there's anything that I missed that I could control going into this climb.
First of all, I admire anyone who says, what can I do differently? So many people come off of an unsuccessful climb and say it was the weather, my teammate was a jerk, I got a stomach bug. So I really admire people who do that self-reflection and say, what can I do differently the next time? Because I think that's what makes us better as a community if we're all trying to improve how we show up when we go to climb. As your coach, what I saw was you taking it very, very seriously, and you wanted to understand all the resources you had available to you, and you wanted to maximize all of those as much as you could. So you really got into training, and you were a student, I would say, of that process. Like, you challenged me sometimes, which I think is great. You had good questions. You wanted to understand how it was working and why certain things were important. And I think that contributed to you really being all in when it came to preparation. You also, like you said, used Hypoxico, and you spent a couple months, 6 weeks in Colorado before you went.
Yeah, I think 5 or 6 weeks. So I went in the summer for a month and then I went back right before I left, which I think was really decisive because it really allowed me to mentally and physically focus. Training was much easier out there than it is on the East Coast of the United States in Maryland. And the other thing is, like, I really had to trust the training process because it was different than what I would typically do in my life. Well, so given my background, I mean, I've spent 24 years in the Army, so I had a very specific training regime and like the special operations community and how we do things. I've done bodybuilding competitions in my life, so I was very specific. I've done 100-mile cycling events. Like, I've done a lot of different things. So this time, as I'm preaching like process over outcome. What I guess I didn't necessarily completely anticipate was within that process of the training for the mountain, I was going to have to trust the process you were putting me through, which I didn't always completely understand. I'm like, I don't understand this. Why is how many conversations did we have about aerobic and anaerobic threshold?
But we sorted it out. I genuinely like working with people who are inquisitive and want to understand things. And I get that's not every single person I'm going to work with. But like I said, I think when you understand it a little bit better and maybe I pick up some things from our conversation, overall, we're elevating the community of mountaineering and what we know about fitness. And that makes us all better.
I agree, because this is what Lisa has me doing. So I'm just going to go, I'm going to go do it. And, I just kept saying, hey, trust the process, right? And, of course, I kept reflecting on your own success. So it's like, okay, well, clearly she knows what she's doing because you have done these things. So it's like just putting that trust in, like, okay, well, I'm doing something that you have done. So you have you have walked that path. I wouldn't say challenge, but ask, why would I challenge that? But also ask questions to understand it. Because in my mind, if I can understand how something's working, it leaves less to random thoughts and guessing versus, okay, this is how this is tying into the bigger path or the bigger plan.
What made you decide to do some of those other things like train hypoxically and live at altitude? Well, walk me through that process of how you decided to do those things.
When I was thinking about 2023, we got to base camp the first time, which is at 14,500 feet roughly. I think within like an hour and a half or 2 hours, I was not feeling good. Like, it hit me really hard. I took the Diamox and started feeling better. But then I also remember, moving from camp 2, Nido, to camp 3, I mean, I was struggling. I was
Yep.
breathing, and I probably still had a little bit of the cold, but I was breathing. It just really impacted. So to me, it was okay. And I don't want to say I've had a history. Like when I climbed Whitney, let's just put it this way: there's a couple times where I know altitude has impacted before. So that to me, that was another one of the process steps of I can control this. So let me control this. Let me do the hypoxico. Let me get to elevation in Colorado. So when I show up, at least I've been living at over 5,000 feet in Colorado and training 8 to 12, 13,000 feet. So
Yep.
my body's adjusting a little bit or a little bit more ahead of the game.
So different training plan, hypoxic training, living at altitude. And then you also spent some time doing breath work training with Anthony LaRubio,
Yes, I did.
which I think when you hear the phrase breath work training, you think, oh, that must be simple and easy to do, but it is.
It's so hard.
And I'm still going through it. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that stemmed from the same thing of between the two camps, I was really having a hard time breathing. And I remember talking to Mike, one of the guys on the team was up ahead of me. And I just, I met him at one certain point. And I just remember telling him, like, I can't breathe. Like, I
Yeah.
could not breathe. I could not regulate my heart rate. Well, I remember looking at what my watch said, which was not an accurate depiction of what I was actually feeling. And I was like, man, I cannot breathe. And I remember, again, it's the same thing. I remember Mia saying something in our messages when she had mentioned some, I was like, well, what is turning people back? I mean, she mentioned something specifically about some people just couldn't figure out how to breathe properly. I can't remember the timing, but it was almost like this stars aligned because I came across something about breathing. There was the James
Yep.
Nestor book,
Breath.
Breathe. And then I think I mentioned it to you, and you happen to have Anthony on your very next podcast just randomly. So then, to me, then you connected me with Anthony. And Grahalis just also happened to be
Right.
doing something with Anthony.
Right.
So I'm like, okay,
Fine.
clearly that's the world telling me do breath work, right? Like I'm like, I can choose to ignore all these signs or I can just jump into it. So
Yep.
I signed up with Anthony and I didn't realize how hard breathing was and the exercises that were, there were times I think I told you I would have to do the strength workouts that you were putting me through first and then do his breath work because when I was done his breath work, I was done. I was exhausted.
Could you feel the difference each of those things, each of those changes you made had this year? Like, did you feel like I'm breathing easier? I'm more acclimated. My fitness feels better. Like, how did all of those changes play out for you on the
Oh
mountain?
yeah, definitely because it's kind of like interesting because I tried, on the mountain I tried not to get overly focused on what the data was telling me on my watch, right? Like cuz you can, at
Right.
that point it is what it is. So I would look at it, but I would be able to tell like, okay, yeah, I'm moving, my heart rate is low. And I think only one time did I allow myself to kind of go back and compare the data because it was on my phone and it was pretty close. And I was like, all right, that's it. I'm not looking anymore at the data. Like, how do I feel? Like, how do I
Right.
feel? I felt good. Breathing. I was absolutely thinking about breathing like the entire time. All right, nasal breath, diaphragmatic
Yep.
breathing, like in my nose, out my nose, unless I
And like
just got to
big
that point.
belly breaths, like making sure you're
Yes.
filling up your lungs fully each time.
So all of those, and then how to do the physio breaths if you think like you're out of breath, and the same thing. It's kind of like the same thing we talked about with the training. It was understanding what I'm doing, like downloading CO2, right? So as I was walking, I would like tell this mantra, like almost like a car. I'd be like in fuel, out exhaust, right? So I was like trying to get myself to think, all right, like the breathing
Fuel.
is helping me to me, and then understanding like the oxygen driving to the legs, all the training, and then understanding, okay, how do I feel? Hey, I feel good. I don't feel tired. And it was, of course, it was interesting because in Confluencia, what I didn't do in 2023 was we didn't do that acclimation hike. I did not do Cerro Bonnet. So there was two things in which this is more than I'd done in the past, but also realizing, okay, this is good because I'm training myself. My legs were tired, but it was also hard to like not get in my head. I'm like, okay, my legs are tired because there's always that mental aspect of thinking about the last one and not making and constantly fighting like those monsters of, oh, your legs are tired, not letting seeds of doubt get in there.
Or comparing, that can often be the genesis of doubt as well, right? You see someone on your team and they appear to you to be moving effortlessly or breathing easily or not be as fatigued, and so, which is probably not reality, but that's just how it looks to us.
I know. Well, Lisa, I asked two of them once. It was funny. Fortunately, these two did summit, so it makes sense. I asked one, I'm like, "Man, are your legs tired at all?" And he's like, "No, man, it feel good." And I asked the next climber next to me, Martin and Alan, they were right next to me. And I asked Alan, I'm like, "Your legs tired?" He's like, "No, not at all." And I'm like, "You guys could have lied to me, right? Like you could at least lie to me and
It's my
made
ego.
something up." But
Right.
for the good thing is they both summited also, so I felt a little
Right.
better. But I'm like, "Damn, my legs are tired, right?"
Well, maybe they were actually lying to you. Maybe they were tired and they didn't want you to know that they were tired.
that is true. And maybe I'm just too honest. I'm like, well, my legs are tired. You know, I was like,
I bet
damn.
your legs were tired.
I'd like to think so, but yeah, it was funny. But you're right. I was like, okay, I'm not asking those questions again to anybody, right?
Right.
So it was like, all right, I'm not asking that because I don't want to hear.
Right. Just climb your climb, stay in
Yeah,
your bubble, don't compare, don't go down that, slippery slope of starting to feel negative or having that negative self-talk in your brain.
yeah, exactly. So I try to avoid that.
So would you, looking back, right? So you summited, would you have done anything differently now about your preparation in 2024? Obviously, you had the desired outcome, but there's still room for improvement, or maybe you felt like maybe I didn't really need to move to Colorado for 5 weeks. Would you change anything?
Let's see. I would definitely go to Colorado for sure. I might even do it even longer if I could.
Yeah.
I might do it. I think the only thing, right, the combination of like with you and Anthony, the only thing I think I would add would be doing like the second day, like when we were doing back to back climbs, like on one of the days, like actually using that sport mask to climb.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know if I'm a fan of the sport mask or not. I think it has the benefit probably of strengthening your respiratory muscles. Is that why he was having you do it? Just to
Yes.
build strength?
I think there's the mental aspect of it as well,
Ah,
of psychologically understanding, at least in
what?
my mind, how hard it is to breathe.
That's fair.
Because you can't really replicate it until you get there. And like, it is really hard to breathe. Whereas if I had done, again, I don't know, but that would be because I'd thought about it like once or twice of adding it. And I'm like, no, that's going to suck because you can't breathe through those things, right? Like they're horrible. But I thought, okay, I might have done that because that would have mentally strengthened,
Yeah,
psychologically helped me
yeah.
realize. But I don't think that's necessary unless you're probably going over 15 or
20.
16,000 feet,
I
right? I
agree with
don't
that
think
for sure.
it's
Yeah,
necessary for
rainier.
anything
No,
below that, or
no.
maybe not even up to 19 or 20. But it would have been interesting to see that that dynamic play out a little bit.
How was your mindset different this year compared to 2023?
Well, first of all, I knew I was prepared. I was like, okay, look, I had done everything. I had trained. Like, I could look at my physical data and see I was 3 times baseline fitness higher than I was previously. Still had to fight some of that doubt. I mean, there was
Yeah,
times on the mountain, like I would still fight the, am I ready? Can I do this? But I knew, like, I was like, I just knew. I'm like, I had put in the work. Like,
right.
I'm like on this in this group. I'm like, I highly doubt. I could be wrong. I don't know because I didn't ask. But I'm like, I'm certain I probably trained as hard, if not as hard, as anybody on this climb.
I can tell you based on the athletes I work with, you are at the top of the list in terms of the effort you put in to training from a holistic view, right? Not just doing the physical work, but thinking about mindset, working on breath work, thinking about team dynamics and logistics. You put way more effort into all those things than most people do.
Well, I appreciate that. It wasn't like I didn't have this, like at every point you think like, oh, all right, I know I'm going to make it. I didn't have a feeling of relief until that last part where you go up the rock,
Yep.
the little rock scramble. It wasn't until I got up and I saw
The cross.
the cross that I was like, I'm going to make it. Right?
That's so interesting because that was one of the things I wanted to talk about today because I think people who aren't climbers think, God, you get to the summit of this mountain you've worked for multiple years to climb. Like, what does that feel like? It must be this euphoric, like life changing experience. In my experience, that standing on the summit is not what changes me. It's what comes after. But I think it's also the point when you know you're going to summit. That is where if there is magic, that's where it is. It's not when I actually stand on the summit. It's when I realize, oh, I can do this. So for
Yeah,
you, that was almost to the top.
almost to the top, right? Because I kept having those seeds, right? And it was from, the quote unquote traverse, which I like to call the traverse because it's like a traverse briefly
Goes
and
up.
then it's just uphill and it was all scree because there wasn't a lot of snow. From there into the cave up, I mean, it's
It's hard.
hard. I mean,
Yeah,
it's hard.
22,000 feet. It's hard.
And then when I saw it, and I was like, I got emotional. I was like, all right, I'm going to make it. Like, I'm going to make it. And then, like you said, it's funny you said about like you think standing on the summit's this big emotional thing. The guy has this video. It's hilarious, right? It's like everybody's jumping up and down, and it pans over. Like I got up, I looked at it, and I just went over and sat down. Like I just
Yeah.
went over and sat down. I was like, oh man, because I think just the emotional weight of my previous attempt,
Yep.
then everything going into it, because we weren't even sure we were going to get a window to do this because of the weather. It was just like, I'm just going to sit down and be here for this moment.
Which is, I think, a beautiful way. I get a little snarky about people celebrating on the top of a mountain because I think for me, it's about showing reverence to that peak and just being sort of calm and quiet and grateful is how I do that. And also, as you know, it's only halfway. Like you have a lot more work to do to get off that mountain. There's really not a lot to celebrate about being on the top except more work.
It was good. I mean, we all hugged and it was great. We all hugged, celebrated. We sat down and ate a little bit, but then we're like, okay, now we've got
Gotta
the.
go back to work.
And I always say, everybody's, on the descent, everybody's like in their own private hell, right? It's just like, all right, just got to get down thinking about, whatever it might be. I mean, it was a good descent down, but you're right. It's like just halfway. You're like, you still got a long way to go before you
And
truly feel celebratory. At least for me, where it's like, okay, I'm back at camp, everything is good, quote unquote, good.
you're out of danger now when you're back at base camp.
Yes.
You had not great weather this year. I remember I really try, I of course want the best for every person that I coach, but it's not about me. It's not, if summits or doesn't summit, that's not about me. And unless it's a reflection of how I coach them, of course, but like I never feel disappointed. And I hear from athletes like, I don't want to let you down by not summiting. And that's really not what it's about for me at all. But I will have to say, I was looking at those wins and I was like, oh my God, if Dave does not get even a shot, I'm going to lose it.
We
So,
did not think we were. And the guides even, one of the guys even said to me at some point when it finally looked like we were going to have a window, they had said even when we left the trailhead, they didn't think we would have a shot
yep.
because they can see that far out. And they didn't think we were going to have a shot. And, we were at Nido for 3 nights waiting, so we used 2 of our 3 weather days. And the third day, it was insane. It was the only morning we woke up on the mountain the entire time where we woke up and there was no wind. I mean, it was beautiful, beautiful, calm morning. And the night prior, just 5 hours prior, clouds were moving in. There was high winds. But that morning, it was
Beautiful.
calm. We had a little wind on the traverse, but otherwise it was, it was cold, but you're wearing enough gear, you can't really tell when you're moving. But
Yep.
it was, yeah, it was, the whole time I'm, sitting here and mentally I'm thinking, and we know this about the weather many days in advance. So it's fighting like staying focused and not getting wrapped around the weather and starting to think, oh yeah, there's no shot, I don't know. And I honestly didn't think we were going to have it, but I kept telling myself, hey, you got to be ready because, we might get it. Staying focused on it might happen is tough because I didn't, even the night prior, I was like, I don't think we're going. And, now I'm thinking, okay, this whole process over outcome, I'm really going to think about because the outcome can't, there's variables we can't control and the weather is one of them. And I'm thinking, I put all this training in for, I don't know, 7, 8 months, and then I might not even get a shot at it.
Yep.
Myself and the rest of the team, we might not even get a shot. So needless to say, we were pretty stoked when we're like, hey, we're actually going to do this.
Well, I love that you stayed, like you have this data, right? Which doesn't look great, looks pretty grim, but you stayed anchored on, we might still have a shot. Like I still need to be sharp and mentally ready and have all my gear ready and not get out of that sort of mountain mindset because it could still happen. Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, you're sitting there 18,500 feet, just hanging out, playing some cards if you can, staying warm. And then you're right, like getting out of the mountain mindset of, all right, well, this isn't going to happen. I almost went down that slope a couple times, but I kept trying to tell myself, okay, I can only control myself. I cannot control the weather, but I can control, am I ready? Am I not ready? Do I have doubt? Don't I have doubt? Like what?
Am I
Let me
taking
just
care of
focus on that.
myself, still eating, drinking,
Mm-hmm.
sleeping as much as you can? It's so true. I've tried to control the weather many times and so
Doesn't
far
work.
haven't been able to.
I mean, we had talked about mindset a lot, and I think that was the other thing I learned from last time is, a lot of my climbs have been all in like the lower 48 of the United States, and they're, you can peak bag on some of these in a day if you go car to car.
Yep.
Otherwise, you can do most of them in 2 days, 3 days at the, at the most if you really want to. So that's a whole different ballgame when you're just sitting on a mountain for
Yeah.
15 days.
Like 24/7. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do.
And you're around this immense beauty and you don't want to lose sight of that, but you're also, you're at that altitude, you're basically just kind of degrading the entire
You
time
are.
you're there. So it's just, all right, let's just be positive and,
I
hope
think
this thing.
your approach is the right one, is to focus, what can I control in the situation? It is not the weather. It is how I take care of myself. It is my mindset. It's how I'm still staying engaged with what's happening around me and not checking out. And those things make a difference. They do.
Yeah, they do. And I think, one of the other things that I definitely had changed is I limited connection with the outside world. Last time I was doing a fundraiser, so I was posting stuff, I was seeing stuff. I don't think I was completely present. Where this time, I allowed myself, a few people to message you, my kids, Anthony,
Hmm.
and then my Vern, my operations officer at work, he did a good job of not bringing up any work, I would let him know, but otherwise I limited, any outside noise, which I think is, that's one reason I think a lot of us go to the mountains is to get away from
It
it.
is. So it's so
Um,
ironic then we get there and all we want to do is post pictures of us being there when we're going because we want to just check out and have a little peace.
I know. I told one of the guys he was taking pictures, and I was like, I just want one picture. Like, I just want one picture because none of
Yeah.
these pictures are going to do any justice, and they don't typically anyway.
You mentioned work, so maybe we'll shift to that for a minute to sort of wrap things up. So you run a leadership company, and there are so many, as you know, so many parallels, I think, between mountaineering and just leadership in general. How have you thought through, like, what will you take from your combined experiences on Aconcagua? I'm curious how that's changing your life, if you know yet, and if there's things that you will apply to your work from this experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. So both of them had an impact. So I'm very fortunate when I always tell this because it's funny. At least it's funny to me. When I retired from the army, people were like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I was like, "I don't know. I want to climb mountains and go to NASCAR races. I mean, that's it. I don't. Want to, I don't. I just want to do those two things." Which is funny in itself because they're like completely
Opposite.
opposite, right? Like you can't get any more opposite than those two
Right.
things. I was able to, but I'm very fortunate that work ties directly into these
Yeah.
things. So the first time, I was able to come back and, talk to groups about high performing teams and, what are the characteristics of high performing teams. And I will share this story and they'll look at me like, what, how did that happen? Like you teach
Yeah.
this stuff. I'm like, well, it just goes to show you can be involved in stuff and see things or not see things. Because when you're in it, it's hard to see it.
Mhm.
So it was really powerful to like really be able to show like, hey, here are how things can break down if you don't have certain
Yep.
certain things in place around team dynamics or team design, roles, and
Right.
all these things that nobody intentionally ever tries to do. So that part was really great. And then this next time, I mean, we talk a lot about process in what we do at work is like, hey, you can't control outcomes. There's too many variables. In this case, there's the weather, there's altitude sickness, there's lots of things. The interesting thing is last time I thought the altitude sickness was, well, it was a variable I could have controlled by slowing the acclimation process
Yeah.
down. But most things we can't control the outcome. But if we don't go back and look at the process, we can expect the same outcome. Or what is it? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing
Exactly
over and
right.
over again, expecting the same result.
Yeah.
So this was, after it was like, okay, we talk about this. I'm going to do it. Like I am going to focus this on the process and completely do with what we talk about at work. And then now, this is a great story about, hey, here's the process. There was almost a variable of the weather that I couldn't control. That
Mhm.
would have done the outcome. But, how do we ruthlessly control the process in anything, whether that's climbing, whether, let's say it's, I tell people like, okay, maybe you're looking for a relationship and it's not working. Well, what process are you doing? What are you doing? Right? Maybe you need to do something different that's not doing it. Do you have an
Right.
issue that's not getting better? What are you doing to change that? If you're not changing anything, just expect the same result. So it's really rewarding to be able to go climb and come back and tie things in. Of course, everybody I work with thinks they always tell me I'm happier, more relaxed when I come off a mountain anyway. So that's always my good reason to go do some
Yeah.
work.
They'll start telling you need to go climbing. Come back in a month when you're in a better mood.
Yeah, like I'm in a better mood. I have all these great ideas and things now.
I think it's very cool that you can apply what you learn in the mountains to your work, and that through that work, you can help other people achieve whatever their goals are, even if they're not in the mountains.
Whether it's the military or climbing, I think even climbing is probably more relatable to some folks than, they can conceptually see themselves climbing more than they can see themselves in the military. But, being able to use those stories, to me, I think it allows, some connections to take place. And, the reality is you can take a process or leadership lessons. And like you said, there's so many from the mountains that translate to day-to-day life. I find myself fortunate to be able to somehow figure out how to make that work. I guess I'm going on 8 years now. I find myself fortunate to be able to find something that I'm passionate about that ties into what I'm passionate about at work and helping other people.
Yeah, same. I feel exactly the same way. Well, any tips or anything else you want to leave people with who maybe, so Aconcagua season's not quite over?
I specifically wanted to write stuff down on these because I'm like, all right, what are the things? So I thought, for the one was like train, train, and train. You got to train. I mean, that's it. I mean, mentally, we were talking at one point, when I was doing Bear Peak, I was like, Lisa, I don't want to do another route. And you
Can't
said,
go
well,
up there.
you'll remember this when you're on Aconcagua. And I did. It's like, yep, this is that moment where I'm like, I'm glad I went back up for a second time when I didn't want to. So you have to train, train, and train because it's a big mountain. Understand your goals ahead of time to kind of reduce stress, right? And this gets into whether it's porters, oxygen, whatever it is, like what is your goal for going?
Yes.
And to limit those things, because to me, any of these like side things that can distract and take any energy from you, whether it's physical or mental energy, is not needed. Stay present, stay present, leave the weather alone, let the weather be what it is and just control what you can, those specific things. I think for at least what I seen maybe a couple times now is, at least with Aconcagua, people get kind of this false belief because if you're taking the normal route, it is a non-technical route. So it was like, hey, we can just show up and we can walk up this mountain.
So not true. Like, I just cringe when I hear people think that or say that.
Yeah, it's not. But you know that I know that it's a big mountain, and it just you have to train
Yep.
for that mountain. And I do think, and this isn't me saying it. This is a lot of the guides would say, because I think a lot of folks maybe listen have done Kili and are like, oh, I've done Kili, I can go right to Aconcagua. I have not done Kili, so I don't know, but I can say from what I've heard is it's not a one for one.
This
It's like
most
apple to
even
orange.
like you need to go climb in Ecuador or Mexico or some other intermediate mountain that gives you a taste of what it's like to be on an expedition and on a big mountain with unpredictable weather and difficult terrain and harsh conditions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're just a long time and
Yeah.
understanding like, hey, it's
Yep.
it is funny. You just like you don't realize, but like from the moment you're on the trailhead, I mean, you were just walking up, for the entire duration. Right? Like I'm just gonna walk up. I'm gonna walk up. I'm gonna walk up.
Yep.
And,
I think it was K2 when I was like, when I started my descent, and I was like, this is the first time I've walked down in 5 days. I've only been going up, whatever it was, 5 days.
yeah, it is. You're just like, oh, walking down. This
Yeah.
is
New concept.
Yeah, this is great. So those are the main things, kind of do the research, understand the mountain, understand that it's, if you're going from, like I did, a lower 48 to a big mountain like that, it's, at least I don't think it's the same training.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's not.
there's things you probably want to prepare for
Absolutely.
before you go down there.
Well, congrats again. Super stoked that it worked out for you. And it really has been a pleasure helping you get ready and watching you grow through that process and learn and just become even more motivated to achieve your goals. So well done, Dave. And thanks for sharing your experience with everybody too.
I appreciate you having me.